If you're a Marvel fan, this is one that definitely needs to be on your radar. New book, The Winter Soldier Cold Front, is now available from Disney Books. And this is a name you might recognize from an interview we did a couple years ago as well for another Marvel book. It's author Mackenzi Lee. Mackenzi, how are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here with you.
So happy to have you back. And I was looking forward to figuring out what your third book was going to be in this Marvel series. So, how excited were you to tell the story of the Winter Soldier?
Wildly excited. The Ed Brubaker run of Winter Soldier comics is like what made me a comic book reader and the first like set of comic books that I really fell in love with. And because of those, Bucky Barnes and the Winter Soldier have been my favorite comic book character pretty much forever, as long as I've been reading comic books. So this was the dream project. They've all been great, but this one was the dream.
I think this is the one you were teasing when the last time we talked. You said you couldn't say what it was. I'm fairly certain you were
Probably,
talking about
yeah,
this one.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Here's the difficulty, though. I mean, this is a very popular character, obviously, and a lot of that has to do with what happened in the what's been happening in the MCU and things like that. So different fans have actually been introduced to Bucky Barnes in different ways. So when you approach this story, did you feel like you had to kind of think about what would appeal to both fans of the MCU movies, but also like yourself, the comics as well?
I mean, yes and no. I kind of, ooh, I almost dropped my phone there. Um, I kind of learned my lesson with the first book, which was Loki, in that you can't please everybody. And I was so like with Loki, because I mean, there's lots of Bucky fans. There are Loki fans, and they all had something to say to me about Loki. And so I sort of got caught up in trying to make my Loki a Loki for everybody, right? I wanted it to be Jack Kirby's Loki and Tom Hiddleston's Loki and Neil Gaiman's Loki and the Norse poetic Ada Loki, and then eventually realized that he was so weighed down. I was like, you gotta put all that aside and just write this character as you see him, and that's what I was hired to do. So I feel kind of like by the time I got to Bucky, I was like, this is a snap after Loki. No fans scare me after the Loki
You
fans.
had to get the hardest character out of the way
I
first. It just
truly did.
move
I
that
it
off
was
to the
it was
side.
baptism by fire. It's been a cakewalk since then.
Oh, what a way to get involved with that. So Cold Front actually has two timelines at play here, which I love. 1941, we've got 1954 as well. I think that makes the story a lot more interesting too. So it's Bucky's story, but did it almost feel like you were working with two different characters, which makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was part of like what appeals to me so much about the Winter Soldier and about Bucky Barnes is are these questions of identity, and who you are when sort of everything essential about you is stripped away from you. What's left, and how does who you are always stay, and does it sort of fight its way through any sort of veneers that are put over it? And so it felt like writing two different characters because it is two different characters in a lot of ways. It's the same person but two different characters, that then sort of intersect, and one of them realizes who he is at the end. Um, and it was a tremendously fun challenge. I knew from the start that I wanted to do these two timelines. I presented them because when I initially talked to Marvel, they sort of said, "Do you want to write about Bucky or do you want to write about the Winter Soldier?" And I said, "I want to do both." And when you have this character who's existing as two different people in two different timelines, I'm like, why not take advantage of this and use this to create these sort of parallel storylines that eventually intersect and talk about these two different time periods. So it's something I've always wanted to do as a writer, is write a dual timeline book, and this just felt like the perfect opportunity and the perfect vehicle for it.
When you're doing something like that, do you kind of start with, does the idea start with the intersection point, or does the intersection point just kind of find it? Do you find your way there as you're writing, putting the story together?
For me, it started with the intersection point. I think if I hadn't planned it out beforehand, I would have fumbled around in the dark for a long time before I got to that. And I used to be the kind of writer that would do that, and I would sort of feel my way through a story, and then at the end be like, now that I've worked on this for a long time, I know what it's about. Um, and Marvel has sort of by necessity made me an outliner because you have to plot everything so intensely beforehand, and they have to approve it and make sure you're not conflicting with what somebody else is doing, or messing with somebody else's timeline, or what have you. And it's actually super, super effective, turns out, to write a plan ahead of time, especially when you're doing a book that is a little bit more challenging plot wise, and to manage these two different timelines. So it was definitely in my brain from the start. I pitched this as a dual timeline book. I pitched it as sort of the John le Carre, Ian Fleming sort of pastiche, featuring Bucky Barnes. And yeah, if I hadn't planned it, I don't think I would still be writing it now.
And I do love both timelines too, which is very difficult to do in a story like
Thank
this
you.
because you always I always tend to find
Right.
myself
There's
wanting
always
one or
one
the
that you
other.
want to flip it. I struggle with that with dual point of view books or when there's like an ensemble cast that they
Mhm.
all narrate. I'm like, I just want to flip ahead to the favorite character.
But I
So
didn't do that
that's
this
high
time. I
praise.
did not do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
I couldn't help but wonder though, as I'm reading through this, which was more fun to write though, your young rebellious Bucky or that mysterious Winter Soldier character?
They're different. I mean, I'm always a little bit more attracted to characters that have a little bit more, what's the word, more of an edge to them. I like writing snark and banter, and I love a righteously indignant teenager who has no idea what they're talking about. And so I was more attracted, I think, to Bucky because he can be a little sassy and he can talk back and he's a snarky jerk, and he's a 16-year-old boy, whereas the Winter Soldier is very much like essentially created to comply and to not question and to follow orders and not talk back to things. So I found the humor, though, in the Winter Soldier timeline comes through the people around him, which specifically he has a handler he works with called Rostova. And I enjoyed sort of the dynamic of the two of them, of him sort of being the straight man to her making very dark jokes that he has no idea what she's talking about because he's essentially a blank slate. So I ended up finding a way to sort of snark in both timelines. But there's more, I don't know, there's more discovery in the Winter Soldier timeline. He's actively chasing like who he is. Bucky is sort of unfurling the mystery as he goes, and those present different challenges and also different uh fun as a writer. In the Bucky timeline, he's interacting with this young sort of chess champion who he ends up having to go on the run with when they both accidentally witness a murder together, and they were sort of a fun dynamic to play off of. And I enjoyed writing about that sort of teenage obsession when you meet someone and within 5 minutes you're like, I can't imagine my life without you. And also I love stories about people who come into our lives very briefly and yet still have a very deep impact on us. So all that being said, there is no answer. I loved them both. They were both really fun for different reasons.
Of course, you'd say that, and I can't blame you either. By the way, that's not a cop out at all. I loved them both too. It's
Let's
you
and
bring
I, now that I'm at the end of the series, I keep getting the question of like, which one was your favorite to write? And it's like, well, that's not fair.
yeah,
I loved and hated them all.
right,
They
and
all
that
gave me trouble. They were all wonderfully fun. Like you can't pick a
exactly.
favorite.
Exactly. You bring up Rostova though, and that was a character that really caught my attention because I keep thinking, okay, where have I heard that name before? And I know that there was a Rostov in the stories in the comics, but not a Rostova. I know you've got Karpov in the story as well. So talk about the decision to bring the character of Rostova in and that dynamic between the two of them a little bit more because I found myself really hating her at first, but liking her more as the story went on.
Yeah, I mean, she's kind of meant to do that. I think the Winter Soldier V feels very similarly to you on that front. Her name actually comes from Tolstoy. All the code names in the Winter Soldier section of the story all come from Tolstoy because I'm a huge nerd. And my like main reference is Tolstoy. One of my big pandemic projects, which is when I sort of started first thinking about this book, was during the pandemic, was I read War and Peace after a years-long obsession with an electro pop opera called Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812, which is, it only gets nerdier from here, which is based on 75 pages of War and Peace. And so one of the characters in War and Peace is Natasha Rostova, which is where Rostova's name came from. And then the Winter Soldier's code name at the time is Vronsky, which is Count Vronsky from Anna Karenina. And then as you dig back into his sort of past, we get into all these other Tolstoy related code names. Anyway, all of that to say, Rostova came from when I was actually researching a previous book I wrote called Bygone Badass Broads, which is about it's a nonfiction book, true stories of women in history who you probably don't know about, but definitely should. I ran into stories about the female sniper squadrons that were employed by the Soviet Union in World War II, and these all-female sniper battalions who were some of the sort of most formidable soldiers on the front. And I remember reading about them, and in particular, Rostova she was initially inspired by one woman who's, I won't try to say her name because I will embarrass myself with my Russian pronunciation, but she sort of became this ambassador for Russian relations, but also for women in the war effort during World War II. And like went to the United States and met with Eleanor Roosevelt at some point. And I remember thinking like, this is a fascinating story. This is a fascinating woman. what happens after, though? Like, how do you come back from doing something like this, and from living these sort of 4 or 5 very intense years of this very singular purpose, which is so bleak and dark and focused, and like, what do you do with your life after that? How do you ever have a normal life after being that person? And that's sort of where Rostova came from, was wondering, like, how do you come back from being a soldier, and what happens to the people who can never quite shake the war, and who are willing to, in order for her to just like keep living, she's been willing to make this sacrifice of, she sacrifices pieces of her humanity and her own identity. But then she starts to get attached to her new little spy friend.
And she is a great character too. And by the way, War and Peace plays a role in this story. I won't tell you what it is, but once you see it, you won't forget it once you read the story for sure. Mackenzi, I feel like the term antihero gets overused sometimes, especially when you're talking about the comic book world and these characters like
I was
this.
going to say, especially now that it's a Taylor Swift song, everybody's using
Right,
it.
exactly. And that song is everywhere now too. So do you kind of feel, is antihero an accurate description of this character? Or would you say it's something else? Because I kind of feel like maybe that's not the right label if there even is one.
I mean, I think with the Winter Soldier, it's hard because he's working under coerced he's working under sort of a false reality, right? How do you hold someone accountable for their actions when they're being presented an alternate version of reality? But also, how do you hold yourself accountable? Like, we see that a little bit in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV show. We see it in the Ed Brubaker comics, like, of Bucky wrestling with this idea of, like, I did these things. I wasn't totally myself when I did these things, but I did do them. Like, how do I atone for this? I think out of the two of them, out of the Winter Soldier and Bucky, I think Bucky is kind of more the anti-hero, because he's sort of a little shit, like, and that's part of what makes him a fun character. And his journey over the course of the book, though, is realizing that even in these sort of moral wars where we're fighting against this absolute bad of this big bad of Germany, right, and the Nazis, there's still going to be collateral damage. There's going to be people who get lost and hurt along the way. And how do you reconcile those things? And again, at what point, how do you decide what you're willing to sacrifice and what pieces of your humanity you're willing to give up? And we see that more with Bucky Barnes in the comics, because his job is sort of to go in after Captain America and clean up the mess and get his hands dirty in a way that our savior of American patriotism and goodness and moral right and wrong can't. And I wanted to sort of set that up and set up Bucky realizing that there is no good and bad, there is no black and white when you're talking about these sort of large scale global conflicts, and learning to reconcile and learning sort of his own limits and what he's willing to sacrifice and what he's willing to get away with. And I think that's part of what makes an anti-hero. And I think it's an accurate term, but I also think it's been sort of a bastardized term at this point, because we're all anti-heroes. We all act in our best interest sometimes over others' interests. We all do selfish things. We all indulge our own pride and our own fear and all those things that sort of traditionally define an anti-hero. The only people who aren't anti-heroes are people like Steve Rogers, who is created to be sort of a force for moral fortitude, and his sort of defining feature is his goodness in the face of all else. And that's why I think we like anti-heroes, is because we all are kind of anti-heroes ourselves.
Relatable whether you like it or not, basically, kind of thing. Yeah, no doubt about that. Absolutely. So, Mackenzi, before I let you go,
not into the abyss, lest the abyss stares back at you.
Oh, look at that. That is just knowledge that I love. I love quotes like that. So, Mackenzi, before I let you go, last time we chatted, and it was a couple years ago, but you talked about how big of a Captain Marvel fan you are. How's the lobbying going for getting Carol Danvers to be a story that you get to tell?
This is looking like it's going to be the end of the road with me and Marvel. This is my last contracted book with them, but there are so many great writers working with Carol Danvers and telling those stories. I'm so excited about the new film. And honestly, like, sometimes it's great to be the writer of these stories. Sometimes it's even more fun to get to be the reader and just like engage in this totally uncomplicated fangirl way. So right now, it doesn't look like it's going to happen, but I'm not mad about that. I'm enjoying where I'm at.
Well, make sure you get in this book, The Winter Soldier Cold Front, and it is an amazing Bucky Barnes and Winter Soldier story, which is now available wherever books are sold, from Disney Books and on digital if you want to go that route as well. Make sure you get her other books too, not just Loki, but Gamora and Nebula as well, which is another really good story. Mackenzi Lee, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.